The night air was thick and heavy, pressing down on the forest like an unseen force. A low mist curled around the base of the trees, whispering secrets through the underbrush. The only sound was the crunch of gravel under the worn tires of Jack's old pickup truck, the headlights cutting through the dense darkness like two pale, unblinking eyes. In the back, huddled together against the cold metal bed, Mary lay curled protectively around her newborn pups. Their tiny bodies trembled, too young to understand the unnatural chill in the air, too fragile to know what their mother already sensed. Something was wrong. Jack sat behind the wheel, his face hard and unreadable, illuminated only by the dull glow of the dashboard. He had made up his mind. The puppies were useless, too weak, too soft, too ordinary. He had bred dogs for years, forging them into creatures of power and aggression, beasts that could be sold for high prices to the right buyers. But these pups? They had none of that fire. They would never bring him a profit. They were a waste of food, a waste of space. And Mary, she had failed him by bringing them into the world. The truck hit a deep pothole, jarring the vehicle. In the back, Mary flinched, instinctively tightening her grip around her pups. She lifted her head and let out a soft whimper, her ears flicking forward as she studied Jack's back through the small, dust-streaked window of the cab. Where were they going? She had never been taken out like this before, not in the dead of night. Not in silence. Normally, Jack's voice would fill the truck, barking orders, cursing, shouting, but tonight, he said nothing, and that was what frightened her most. The dirt road stretched deeper into the woods, the towering trees leaning inward like silent watchers. Jack's grip on the steering wheel tightened as he spotted the clearing ahead. A perfect spot, isolated, desolate, no houses, no people, just trees and silence. He slowed the truck to a crawl before finally stopping. For a few seconds, there was nothing but stillness. Then, with the calculated precision of a man who had long since numbed himself to mercy, Jack shoved the door open and stepped into the night. The truck groaned in protest, the weight shifting. The moonlight revealed the cold glint in his eyes as he marched toward the back. Mary's body tensed, her heartbeat thundered against her ribs. She could smell his anger, the scent of his leather gloves, the bitter edge of something unnatural in the air. He wasn't here to take them home. Jack yanked the tailgate down with a crash, reaching in with rough hands. Before Mary could react, her leash was jerked tight, pulling her to the edge of the truck bed. She twisted, barking in alarm, but Jack's grip was iron. With one brutal tug, he hauled her down onto the ground. The impact sent a shock through her limbs. But she didn't fight, not yet. She had her puppies to think about. She turned back, but Jack was already lifting the crate. The pups let out soft, helpless cries as they tumbled inside. Panic flared in Mary's chest. She lunged toward them, but the leash cut into her neck, holding her back. No, no. Something was wrong. Jack dragged her through the clearing, his boots crunching against the frostbitten grass. A tree stood at the center of the clearing, thick, ancient, unyielding. Without hesitation, he tied her tightly to the base, looping the leash several times before knotting it off. She fought against it, paws scrabbling against the dirt, but the leash held firm. Then came the final betrayal. Jack turned away. Mary let out a desperate bark, straining forward. But he didn't even look at her. Instead, he walked back to the truck, the puppies still in their crate. He opened the cab, set them inside, and climbed in. The engine rumbled to life. For one fleeting second, Mary still believed he would come back. She wagged her tail, just once, just slightly, waiting for him to turn around, waiting for a command, waiting for anything. But Jack never looked back. The truck rolled forward, its red taillights disappearing into the trees. The sound of the engine faded. And then, there was nothing. Just Mary, alone, tied to a tree, and the darkness pressing in. Mary stood frozen, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps, the cold night pressing against her like a living force. The silence was unbearable. Only the distant rumble of Jack's truck echoed through the trees. And then, nothing. No footsteps returning, no voice calling her back. Just the vast emptiness of the forest swallowing her whole. For the first time in her life, Mary was truly alone. The wind slithered through the trees, rustling the leaves like whispers in the dark. She pulled against the leash, desperate, clawing at the dirt beneath her paws. The knot wouldn't budge. The thick leather burned against her neck, cutting into her skin as she struggled. Her ears flicked forward, straining to hear the sound of tiny whimpers, but her puppies were gone. Jack had taken them. Why? Why had he done this? A whimper escaped her throat, the sound pitiful and small. The cold seeped into her bones, her body still weak from giving birth, exhaustion dragging at her limbs like chains. She couldn't stay here. She wouldn't. Her pups were out there somewhere, crying for her, needing her warmth, her protection. She had to get free. Mary's mind raced, searching for a solution, but her thoughts were broken, scattered. She had never been alone before, never had to think beyond Jack's orders. But Jack wasn't coming back. She had to survive on her own. Then, the forest stirred. A sound, slow, deliberate, heavy. Footsteps. Mary's entire body went rigid, her ears perking up, her breath catching in her throat. Something was watching her. The trees swayed, their shadows stretching long and twisted in the moonlight. The air smelled different now, thicker, wilder. Then she saw them. Eyes, glowing, unblinking, watching. They materialized from the darkness. One by one, their bodies moving like liquid shadows between the trees. Wolves. A whole pack. Their fur was dark as midnight, their muscles rippling beneath their coats, moving in eerie silence as they surrounded her. Trapped. A low growl rumbled from deep within Mary's throat. A mother's warning. Her instincts screamed at her to protect, to fight, to never surrender. She may have been abandoned, but she wasn't weak. She lowered her head, her lips curling back to expose her teeth. She may have been tied, but she was not powerless. The largest of the wolves stepped forward. His presence alone sent a shiver through Mary's spine. He was enormous, his fur streaked with scars, his golden eyes burning like fire in the night. An alpha. He stopped just short of her, his gaze sharp, calculating, sizing her up. Mary's muscles coiled, preparing for the attack, but instead of lunging, the alpha did something unexpected. He sniffed the air, his ears flicked back for a moment as if considering something. Then, with slow, deliberate steps, he lowered his head, his nostrils flaring as he took in Mary's scent. The growls of the other wolves faded into silence. The alpha took one step closer. And then, he stopped. Mary held her breath. For a single, frozen moment, the two locked eyes. The alpha didn't see a threat. He saw something else. A mother, a fighter, a survivor. Then, with a deep, commanding growl, he turned. The pack hesitated for a moment. But one by one, they obeyed. The wolves melted back into the trees, disappearing as quickly as they had come, leaving behind nothing but silence. Mary stood there, her heart pounding, her breath shaky. They had spared her. But why? As the wind carried their scent away, another realization struck her. She wasn't dead. She had another chance. A chance to fight. A chance to live. A chance to find her pups and take them back. The wind had changed. Mary could feel it as she stood beneath the towering trees, her breath misting in the cold air. The wolves had left her alone. They had spared her. But why? She didn't know, didn't care. Her pups were out there, alone, afraid, and she was still tied to this tree. She snarled and pulled against the thick leather collar, her claws digging deep into the damp earth beneath her. She had no time, no strength. Her body was weak, trembling with hunger and exhaustion. But she had something stronger than muscle. She had purpose. Jack had underestimated her. He thought she would die here. He thought she would accept this fate, like a tool discarded when no longer useful. But Mary was not just a tool. She was a mother, and no mother would let her children be taken without a fight. She twisted, biting at the leather, her teeth scraping against the tough material. Each pull sent a sharp pain through her neck, but she refused to stop. She had to be free. She had to. Snap. The collar tore. Mary collapsed forward, gasping, her throat burning from the effort. She was free. The shock of it held her still for a moment. But then the urgency returned like a lightning strike to her spine. She had to move. Her legs wobbled as she forced herself up. Her ribs sore, her paws heavy. But she ran, through the thick underbrush, her body low, her ears pricked forward, chasing the only thing that mattered, the scent of her pups. The forest was alive around her. Shadows shifted, the trees whispered, the ground crackled beneath her paws. But she was no longer afraid. The wolves had shown her something. This was not Jack's world. It was hers, and she would claim it. The scent trail was faint, but it was there, weaving between the trees, leading her toward something she couldn't yet see. She followed it with a relentless hunger, ignoring the ache in her body, ignoring the bite of cold against her skin. Then, the scent changed. Not just her pups, something else, something sharp, bitter, human. Her heart pounded. Jack. Mary slowed, lowering her body, her breath controlled. The trail led toward a clearing, a road. His truck had been here. She crept forward, silent as the night. The earth was disturbed, tire marks pressed deep into the mud. He had stopped here. Why? And then, a whimper. Mary's entire body tensed. Close. She scanned the area, searching, straining. The scent was fresh, leading away from the road, deeper into the woods. He had taken them, hidden them. But why? A growl rose in her throat. She didn't care. Jack had stolen her pups, and she would tear the earth apart to get them back. With a final glance at the road, Mary turned and ran toward the sound. Mary ran like a shadow through the trees, her breath sharp and measured, her paws barely making a sound on the damp forest floor. The scent of her pups was stronger now, fresh, close, but so was Jack's. He was ahead of her, deeper in the woods. Why hadn't he left? The thought twisted inside her, setting her nerves on fire. Jack was a cruel man, but he wasn't reckless. If he was still here, there was a reason. A trap? A growl rumbled deep in Mary's throat, but she kept moving, weaving through the thick underbrush, her body low and silent. She had spent her life obeying human commands, living by their rules. No longer. Now, she was the hunter. A sharp cry pierced the air. A puppy's whimper. Mary froze, close, just beyond the next rise. She lowered herself to the ground, ears pressed flat against her head, muscles coiled. Every instinct screamed at her to charge forward, to fight, to kill if she had to. But she forced herself to wait, to listen. The trees whispered in the wind, their branches swaying gently. The forest was still, too still. Jack was waiting for her. She could smell it, a familiar, sour scent clung to the trees like rot gasoline. Mary's breath caught in her throat. Then, the unmistakable sound of a match striking. Her body reacted before her mind could catch up. She lunged forward, a blur in the darkness. A burst of orange light flared ahead. Fire. The undergrowth crackled, flames licking at the edges of dried leaves and fallen branches. The heat seared the air, and smoke coiled up toward the sky. Jack had set the forest ablaze. A figure stood just beyond the flames, his silhouette jagged against the growing firelight. Jack. Mary's growl cut through the night like a blade. Jack turned, his expression barely visible through the haze of smoke. But Mary didn't need to see it. She knew what it would be, cold, smug, cruel. "I knew you'd come," he said, his voice low, edged with something almost amused. "You should have died back there." Mary. She bared her teeth, stepping forward, the firelight glinting off her sharp canines. He had no idea what she had become. Jack gestured behind him with a lazy flick of his wrist. "They're still alive, for now." Mary's ears flicked at the sound of faint whimpers beyond the flames. Her pups. Rage and terror crashed through her. But she held firm. She had to be smart. Jack wasn't just trying to kill her, he was toying with her. But he had made one mistake. He thought she was the same dog he abandoned. Mary crouched low, her muscles coiling, her eyes locked on Jack. This was no longer about survival. This was war. The fire roared, twisting and snapping like a living beast, casting flickering shadows across the clearing. Smoke curled through the trees, stinging Mary's eyes, but she didn't waver. Her pups were beyond the flames. Trapped. Jack was in front of her, smirking. He thought he had won. Mary took a slow step forward, her paws brushing against the scorched earth. The heat licked at her fur. But she didn't care. Jack was the true fire, the destroyer. The one who thought he could take everything from her. But he had underestimated the one thing stronger than flames. A mother's wrath. Jack held up his knife, tilting it so the firelight glinted off its edge. "You're still just a dog, Mary," he taunted, his voice calm, confident. "You think you're a hunter now?" Mary's growl rumbled low in her throat. She had been a tool to him, a product, something to be used and discarded. But she was no longer his dog. She was something far worse. She was his nightmare. Jack took a step forward, rolling his shoulders like a man with all the time in the world. He didn't fear her. Good. Mary's body tensed, every muscle coiled. She needed him to think he was in control. Another whimper from beyond the fire, her pups. Her ears flicked, pinpointing the sound. Close. But the flames had spread, blocking the path. No way through. Not yet. Jack saw her hesitation and laughed. You can't save them. He gestured to the growing inferno. You either run, or you die here. Mary's eyes burned, but not from the smoke. She saw it now. The truth. Jack had never been the hunter. He had been prey all along. Mary lunged. She moved like a ghost. A blur in the dark. Jack's eyes widened. He had expected hesitation, not fury. He swung the knife, but she was faster, ducking low, her teeth flashing. The blade sliced air. She was already past it. Her jaws clamped down on his forearm. Jack howled in pain. He staggered, dropping the knife as Mary yanked him sideways, her teeth sinking deeper, crushing muscle and bone. She had held back before. Not anymore. Jack punched at her, but his blows were weak. Panicked. He wasn't in control now. With a snarl, she released him, sending him stumbling backward. He hit the ground hard, clutching his arm, blood seeping between his fingers. Mary didn't hesitate. She turned, sprinting toward the fire. Her pups were waiting. The flames loomed before her, seething and snapping, but fear had no hold on her now. She had already walked through worse. She took a deep breath, then leapt through the fire. The heat scorched her fur, pain flaring across her body. But she landed hard on the other side, rolling through the embers. Her ears rang, her lungs burned, but she was alive, and so were they. Her pups, huddled together, whimpering, their tiny bodies trembling. She was there. She had made it. Behind her, Jack groaned, still alive, but not for long, because Mary was no longer the one running. Now, Jack was the hunted. The night was thick with smoke, the acrid stench of burning wood choking the air. The fire behind Mary crackled, casting ghostly embers into the wind, but she no longer feared the flames. She had already passed through the inferno. Jack was on the ground, clutching his wounded arm, his breaths ragged. The hunter had become the hunted. Mary stood tall, her body aching but unbroken. Her pups were safe. That was all that mattered. But now, it was time to end this. Jack forced himself upright, staggering as he pressed his good hand against a tree for balance. His face contorted with pain. Yet even now, he smirked. You think you've won? He rasped, blood dripping from his arm. You're just an animal. Mary growled low in her throat. No, not just an animal. A survivor. A mother. A warrior. Jack's fingers curled around the handle of his knife, now stained with his own blood. His eyes flicked to the darkness beyond the clearing. He wasn't going to fight. He was going to run. Coward. He turned, bolting into the forest, crashing through the underbrush like a wounded deer. Mary watched him go, her body tense, her instincts burning. He should have faced her. Because now, he had made the worst mistake of his life. She would hunt him. Jack's footsteps pounded against the dirt, his breath ragged as he pushed through the twisted branches. His years of control, of dominance, meant nothing now. He was no longer the master, he was prey. Mary followed, silent as the shadows that clung to the trees. She didn't need to rush. He was bleeding. He was weak. The chase stretched into the depths of the forest, the moon casting a silver glow between the trees. Jack stumbled, nearly falling as he clutched his arm. He swore under his breath, looking over his shoulder. Nothing. No movement. No sound. But he knew she was there. Panic clawed at him. He turned, pressing himself against a tree, his chest heaving. The fire had been left far behind, and now the night belonged to Mary. His eyes darted through the darkness. Come on, he muttered, his voice shaking. Where are you? A growl, low, deep, right behind him. Jack froze. A cold sweat broke across his skin. Slowly, he turned his head, just in time to see the gleam of sharp teeth. Mary lunged. Jack let out a strangled cry as she knocked him to the ground, her teeth snapping inches from his face. He struggled, swinging the knife wildly. But Mary wasn't some caged animal anymore. She twisted, dodging the desperate slashes. Jack was finished. But Mary wasn't done. With a final snarl, she clamped her jaws onto his wrist, the knife clattering uselessly to the dirt. Jack screamed, his strength vanishing as pain overtook him. Mary stepped back, watching him writhe. This was his punishment, not death. Weakness, fear, helplessness. Exactly what he had made her feel. Mary turned, leaving him there. She had pups to protect, a family to return to. Jack was nothing now. Nothing but a man lost in the dark. The first rays of sunlight bled through the thick canopy, painting streaks of gold across the forest floor. The night had been long, filled with echoes of Jack's desperate cries fading into silence. But Mary hadn't turned back. She had left him to the shadows, to his fate, just as he had once abandoned her and her pups. Now, as she emerged into the clearing where her family lay nestled together, exhaustion pulled at her bones, but relief warmed her chest. They were safe. The pups stirred as she approached, their small whimpers filling the crisp morning air. They were huddled close to one another, their fur damp from the cool night. But when they sensed her presence, their tiny tails wagged weakly. They had been waiting for her. Mary nuzzled them gently, licking their heads one by one. She had won, not through violence alone, but through endurance, through strength, through the fire that had burned within her when the world tried to break her. A rustle in the trees made her tense, muscles coiling as she turned sharply toward the sound. But what stepped from the shadows was no threat. The alpha. His golden eyes flickered in the early light, his powerful form moving with the effortless grace of a ruler who commanded respect with every step. Behind him, his pack lingered in the tree line, their bodies tense but waiting for his lead. For a long moment, the alpha and Mary simply watched each other. They had fought side by side. They had defended their own. And now, a silent understanding passed between them. He lowered his head, not in submission, but in acknowledgement. Mary did the same. The wolves had saved her family. And now, she realized, they were no longer just outsiders lurking in the forest. They were allies. With a low rumbling growl, the alpha turned, leading his pack away, disappearing into the morning mist. But he did not go far. Mary knew now, they would always be watching. She exhaled, finally allowing herself to rest. The battle was over, but survival was an endless fight. The world would always test them, challenge them, try to take what was theirs. But Mary and her pups were no longer weak, no longer helpless. They had endured. They had become something more. She settled beside her pups, letting them press against her warmth. Their breathing slowed, steady and safe, as the sun rose higher, illuminating the vast, untamed wilderness. Mary closed her eyes. This was not the end. This was the beginning. Days turned into weeks, and the forest that had once been an unforgiving, unknown battleground had now become a home. The pups, once frail and helpless, had grown stronger, their bodies leaner, their instincts sharper. Mary had taught them well how to track, how to sense danger before it arrived, and how to survive in a world that had tried to break them. But survival was not enough. They had to thrive. One crisp morning, as mist coiled through the towering pines, Mary led the pups to the edge of the stream where they often drank. The air smelled different today, thicker, richer, carrying a scent that sent a ripple of unease through her fur. The pups sensed it too. Their ears perked, their bodies tense. Mary took a cautious step forward, sniffing the air. The scent was familiar yet different. Humans. Her mind snapped back to Jack, to the betrayal, to the pain. But this scent was not his. It was new. A rustling in the brush made her whirl around, placing herself between the pups and the source of the noise. They were not alone. From the trees emerged a figure, two-legged, but smaller than Jack had been. Their posture hesitant rather than cruel. A child. Their clothes were torn, their face streaked with dirt, their eyes wide and filled with something Mary had not expected. Fear. Not of her, but of something else. The wind shifted, and Mary caught another scent, metal, smoke, the sharp tang of something unnatural. And then, she heard it, a distant rumble, heavy, mechanical, moving through the forest where no human had ever ventured before. The pup closest to Mary let out a small whimper. Sensing the tension crackling in the air, the child flinched at the sound, their eyes darting between Mary and the distant threat that had driven them here. Something was coming. Mary didn't know what, but she knew one thing for certain: this child was running from it. Her instincts screamed at her to leave, to take her pups and vanish into the safety of the wild. Humans were dangerous. They had always been dangerous. But so was she. And in that child's trembling gaze, she saw something that made her hesitate. She saw herself. Lost. Abandoned. Left to survive in a world that did not care if she lived or died. The forest had changed Mary. Shaped her into something stronger. Something fiercer. And now, she stood at the edge of yet another choice. To leave the child behind. Or to do what no one had done for her. To fight. Mary let out a low growl, not at the child, but at whatever hunted them both. The pups, sensing her resolve, fell into place beside her. No longer just frightened creatures but a growing pack. The forest had given them strength. And now, it was time to use it. Mary's journey is more than just a tale of survival. It is a testament to resilience. The power of love, and the unbreakable bonds that transcend species. Fear, and betrayal. What began as a story of abandonment and cruelty became one of transformation. Proving that strength is not just about physical survival but about choosing to fight for something greater than yourself. Through Mary, we see the power of adaptation and perseverance. When faced with the wilderness, she did not succumb to fear or despair. Instead, she learned, adapted, and overcame, proving that no matter how harsh life becomes, there is always a way forward. Her journey also teaches us about the power of found family. Blood does not define love and loyalty, actions do. Though she was abandoned by the man she once trusted, Mary created a new family from those who needed her just as much as she needed them. The bond between her, the pups, and the young wolves proves that unity and trust can bridge even the deepest divides. Most importantly, Mary's story reminds us that the past does not define the future. She could have let her pain harden her, turning her into something as cruel as the man who abandoned her. But instead, she chose to protect, to nurture, and, in the end, to fight, not just for herself, but for the innocent lives depending on her. Survival is not just about staying alive. It's about choosing how you live. And Mary chose to live with purpose, with love, and with the heart of a true warrior.